Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Between Two Worlds. I am your host, Annika, and thank you for joining me today. As always, before we get into things, my Patreon is live, and if this content resonates with you and you want to support the show, please do check it out. We have lots of great things over there, like monthly divinations by me on your behalf, more deep dives into topics on spirits, necromancy, and even plants, and a monthly ritual designed just for you. So, with that out of the way, today's episode is one that, keeps looming quite physically in my area, but it also made me think deeper in its connection to the witch itself. And I want to talk about fog, about breath, about mist and vapor and smoke, and about why these things have really been understood across virtually every human culture as spirit matter, as the visible evidence of the invisible world, and as the substance that spirit is made of when it chooses to be seen. Now, I want to start with something that I think at least is pretty understood within the community and, well, many spaces and ways of practicing magic, whether that's, folk traditions, ceremonial, simple charms, and more. And that virtually, again, every major spiritual and philosophical tradition in human history has kind of arrived at the same conclusion independently, which is breath is spirit and the soul is breath. You know, the animating force that makes living things alive is the same substance that you exhale on a cold morning and see hanging in the air like this ghost right in front of you. Humans everywhere across thousands of years observed, the same phenomenon and really drew the same conclusion that the thing that leaves the body after death, the thing that makes the difference between a living person and, well, a corpse is your breath. And that breath, when made visible, looks like mist, like fog, like vapor, and of course, like smoke, like spirit incarnated itself. So, of course, as always, I'm going to talk about some traditions to help build the backbone of the knowledge, so that, of course, in turn, it shall ever make us better sorcerers with deeper minds. First, I want to get into the Greek pneuma. So, in ancient Greek thought, the word pneuma means breath, wind, and spirit, all three pretty much simultaneously. Now, I have come to understand that, these are not really three different meanings of the same word, but more as three aspects of the same thing. So, breath is wind, is spirit. Now, Aristotle used pneuma to explain how life works, how bodies move, how sensation happens, how the soul animates matter. Now, for Aristotle, pneuma was the physical substance through which the soul actually operated in the body. It wasn't purely material and it wasn't purely spiritual. It was the medium between the two, the substance that allowed spirit to interface with matter. So then we also have the Stoics who proposed that, the entire universe was permeated by pneuma, a kind of cosmic breath that structured and animated all of reality. So everything that exists in Stoic thought is held together by pneuma. It exists in different grades or densities. In rocks, it provides cohesion. In plants, it provides growth. In animals, it provides this sort of sensation. And of course, in humans, it provides reason. It's all the same substance, just at different levels of refinement. Now, if pneuma, breath or spirit permeates everything, then when you breathe, you're not just taking in air, you of course are taking in spirit. You're participating in, the cosmic breath that holds reality together. And when you breathe out, when you exhale onto, say, a charm, when you speak a spell, when you blow out a candle, you're releasing spirit back into the world, shaped by your intention specifically. Breathing life into a spell, an effigy over a wound, it's a step that many practitioners believe is crucial and very foundational, myself included. Now, in Hebrew, the word ruach means wind, breath, or spirit, the same triple meaning we see in Greek. And the nishkamach means breath and soul. And, I'm mentioning these particularly because in the creation story in Genesis, God breathes into Adam's nostrils the nishkamach chaim, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, the breath of life. And Adam becomes a living being. Now, I believe this is a story that is pretty well circulated within the witchcraft space in regards to breathing life into things. So, that divine breath specifically. So, even if, we as witches breathe the breath of life into, say, our effigies, our charms, our fetishes, it is not so far removed to what many think our opposing forces are, which, as such as this, is the Abrahamic God. So, in the Kabbalah, this was further developed into a sophisticated taxonomy of the soul. So, the human soul has multiple levels. The nefesh, the vital soul, connected to the body, the ruach, the spirit, connected to the emotion and the moral discernment, and the nishama, which is the divine breath, connected to intellect and the highest spiritual awareness. These three levels are literally named, after breath and wind. Now, what I find particularly interesting about the Hebrew tradition is the emphasis on divine breath specifically. So it's not, just any breath that animates, it's God's breath. The nishama that makes you alive is a piece of divine exhalation. You are, in this framework, literally made of God's breath. Every breath you take is a continuation of that original divine exhalation. Every breath you release carries something of the divine with it. And maybe, it is us, the witch, who plays God every time we breathe the breath of life onto our purpose. Now, if you practice yoga, surely you have heard of prana, and of course, it is, from Hindu traditions. Now, prana is the vital breath, not just, a word for magical force in video games. And while I've seen it used a lot in anime as well, I immediately think of Delicious in Dungeons, which is so good. We need a season two, but that is besides the point. Prana is the life energy. So it's the thing that permeates the cosmos and animates all living things. The entire system of pranayama, breath control, is built on the understanding that by controlling the breath, you control prana. And by controlling prana, of course, you control consciousness itself. The breath is the handle by which you grip the life force. Change the breath, change the energy, you change the mind. And of course, when you change the mind, you begin to change reality. There's also, the practice of prana pratishta, literally establishing prana. So, which this is the ritual of breathing life into a deity image or sacred object. When the murti, the statue of a deity, is consecrated in Hindu tradition, one of the key ritual acts is the infusion of prana. So, the breathing of life force into the image so that becomes a living vessel for the divine presence rather than just a piece of stone or metal or wood or whatever it actually is. Now, in the moment of death is the departure of this prana. The vital breath leaves the body through one of several possible exits, and the exit point determines the soul's destination. Prana leaving through the crown of the head indicates liberation. Now, prana leaving through other points indicates rebirth in various realms. The funeral rites are designed to aid the prana's departure and journey. The cremation fire transforms the body back into its elemental components, and the smoke rising from the funeral pyre is understood as carrying the spirit upward. So the smoke is the spirit in a literal sense. The body is being transformed from solid matter into vapor, from this flesh into smoke. And ultimately into the immaterial world. So, this is why cremation is preferred in Hindu tradition. It's not just a simple disposal of the body, it's actually viewed as transformation of the body into spirit substance. The fire does what death begins. It converts matter into vapor, solid into smoke, and the visible into the invisible. So, the rising smoke of the funeral pyre is essentially seen as the soul actually ascending in its physical form. Now, I am no expert by any means with the Norse tradition, nor have I really explored it to any great extent, but as I think many of us do, we love to read about mythology, and in the Norse creation myth, I do know that the first humans, Ask and Embla, are created from driftwood by three gods. So Odin gives them this breath, the spirit, and life. Without it, they're just, of course, wood. And with it, they're alive and conscious, and they are now ensouled. The Norse understanding of the soul is pretty complex. There are multiple soul parts, but this breath of life is a foundational one. The breath spirit that makes everything else possible. It's the first gift, the essential gift, the one without which none of the others really matter. I really like how this particularly connects to the broader cosmology of this sort of primordial realm of Niflheim. The mist world, the fog world, is one of the two elemental forces that create the universe. Niflheim's cold fog meets um, Muspelheim's fire, and from their interaction, the first being is born. So mist and fog are literally, you know, cosmogenic in Norse thought. They're part of what creates the world. The universe itself is born from fog. So in Norse cosmology, it's easy to quickly see that fog and breath is elemental. It's world forming. It's the substance from which, creation emerges, and the breath spirit that animates human beings is connected to the same misty, vaporous, and liminal substance. Now, I'm sure most of everyone has heard of the Chinese qi, which means breath, vital energy and the fundamental substance of the universe all at once. Now, qi circulates in the body along meridians, it circulates in the landscape along dragon lines, it circulates in the cosmos as the medium through which all change and transformation occurs. The character for qi originally depicted steam rising from rice, which I love this. Vapor, breath, the visible evidence of energy and motion. Now, you can see chi when you are, or when you see steam rising, when you see breath and cold air, when you see mist forming over water. Chi is the thing that you're looking at when you see vapor. So, traditional Chinese medicine is built entirely on the management of chi, essentially, ensuring its proper flow, removing blockages, and supplementing deficiencies. Now, I remember a lot of remedies my Ebola helped us with as kids, were very rooted in Chinese medicine. I remember she had so many posters and even that little foot map. And really, she had her doctorate in, I think, not just psychology, but a few other things. And, now as I've gotten more interested to study more Chinese medicine, I do really love to see all the correlations and the things that sort of spike my memory. But as for us practitioners, the Chinese tradition offers perhaps some of the most practical framework for understanding breath magic. Qi is not just a concept, it's something that you can feel, you cultivate, you direct, and you use. When you breathe with intention, you're moving qi. When you direct your breath toward an object or a person, you are, of course, directing it. So when you speak a spell, you're shaping qi, and when you use your voice and you are really releasing it into the world. Now, within the Chinese traditions, dragons move through mist. They create mist, they hide in mist. The concept of Hongmeng, primordial fog or chaos, appears in Taoist cosmology as the state before creation, this, undifferentiated potential from which all things emerge. And Chinese dragons aren't, of course, the fire breathing destroyers of European tradition. There is a very distinct image that we all see in our minds when we think of Chinese dragons. And they're these water beings, mist beings, creatures of transformation who move between this visible and invisible through the medium of vapor. When mist gathers over a river, it might be a dragon actually moving. When fog rolls through a valley, it might be the dragon breathing. And this connects to chi, breath energy directly to the landscape. The chi of the land is visible as mist, and the dragon lines that feng shui works with are paths of chi. And those paths are sometimes literally visible as patterns of fog. On the mention of spirits, Japanese folklore also treats mist and fog consistently with the supernatural, with the presence of spirits and ghosts and ghouls, with, the boundary between the living world and the dead. So the Yuki-onna, the snow woman, appears in snowstorms and mist. Her body is white and ethereal, dissolving into fog when she departs. But beyond specific named spirits, Japanese aesthetic and, well, spiritual tradition treats mist as a signal. And we, of course, don't just see this in Japanese tradition, but it's very prevalent here. And it says something, you can't quite see. In even Japanese painting, mist is used to separate scenes, to suggest depth, to indicate the presence of things that can't be directly depicted. It's a visual language ultimately. And in the ghost stories, spirits frequently appear accompanied by mist or emerge from it or even dissolve back into it when they leave. The mist is their medium and it's the substance that, they're made of when they choose to be partially visible. And that gives us this framework for understanding spirit manifestation as a gradient, right? Spirits don't go from invisible to fully visible in one step. There's a spectrum, or I don't know, maybe you do just like when you play Phasmophobia or something, a spirit just fucking comes up and T poses in front of your face really quickly and then disappears. But it's personally never happened to me in real life. At this first stage of that spectrum, the point where spirit begins to become perceptible. It kind of looks like mist. It looks like a thickening of the air or like fog. Now, finally, on our little world tour, I want to talk about some Egyptian thought. Many of us already know within this tradition and belief, well, that the soul, of course, has multiple components and it's full of lots of steps and complexities. And, several of them connect to breath and vapor. The ka is the vital double, the life force that sustains the person. It's fed by offerings after death, suggesting it has a, like quasi material existence that requires nourishment. And the ba is the mobile personality that can travel between worlds. It's often depicted as a bird, something that moves through the air, that flies on breath and wind. Now, the moment of death in Egyptian understanding is the moment when the ka separates from the body, when the animating force departs. And the preservation of the body through mummification is partly about maintaining a home for the ka to return to, a vessel that the breath spirit can re inhabit. Now, I really loved studying everything ancient Egypt throughout school and, as a very young person. And one thing that I thought was so fucking cool is the Egyptian emphasis on the mouth in funerary rites. The opening of the mouth ceremony, one of the most important rituals performed on the mummy, was designed to restore the dead person's ability to breathe, to speak, to eat in the afterlife. The mouth is, of course, the gateway for breath, and breath is the gateway for spirit. Without an open mouth, the dead cannot breathe, cannot receive their ka, cannot be fully alive in the afterlife. So, really, I wanted to mention all of these traditions, and of course, can't mention all of them, but when you lay all of them side by side, the pattern is, of course, unmistakable. Every one of them identifies breath with spirit. Every one of them understands that animating force of life as something that enters and leaves through breathing. And of course, they treat them as this sort of vapor and mist and visible breath as the perceptible form of really an otherwise invisible spiritual substance. These traditions developed independently in different parts of the world over different time periods, and they arrived at the same conclusion because they were, of course, observing the same reality. And the practical implications for us practitioners are enormous. Every time you breathe, you're working with spirit. Every time you speak, you're shaping spirit with your voice. And every time you blow on a candle or a charm or exhale into a working, you're directing the same substance that every major spiritual tradition in human history has identified as the soul itself. Now, I do want to yap on a little bit more about breath itself. One of the most consistent beliefs is that the soul leaves the body at death as this breath, as a final exhalation, a vapor, and, it rises from the dying person and departs. So, for most of human history, this was understood as literal observation. You could see the soul leave. It looked like breath, it looked like mist, and this sort of vapor rising from the mouth specifically of the dead. So, if we think about what death actually looks like, physically, a a peaceful one, just for, you know, logical purposes for the conversation. A person is breathing, right? Their chest rises and falls, air moves in and out, and if it's cold enough, you can see that breath as vapor, and then they stop. The last breath leaves the body and nothing follows, no more breath, no more vapor, no more, visible evidence of the animating force. Now, of course, our ancestors watched this happen countless times. They watched the breath leave and not return, and they drew the obvious and quite logical conclusion that breath was the life force. There was no science behind it. They thought that breath was, of course, the soul itself. And when it left for the last time, that was the soul leaving. And, that vapor that rose from the dying person's mouth was the spirit departing, becoming visible one last time before it moved on to wherever spirits go. Now, in some traditions, there are practices around catching or receiving the last breath of a dying person. In ancient Rome, the closest family member would actually lean over the dying person and inhale their last breath, actually receiving the departing spirit into their own body. Now, this has lots of crazy shit you could totally work with, but this was considered both an act of love and a practical spiritual act. You were receiving something of the dying person's essence, their spirit, their accumulated wisdom and power. This practice shows up in various forms across cultures, and the idea that the last breath carries something precious, something that shouldn't be wasted, and really something that can actually be like tangible and received and held is pretty much widespread. But it's this understanding that the last breath is the most concentrated form of the person's spirit, the final release of everything they were, and that this release has power. And maybe it's something that can be bottled. Now, I do want to go back quickly, just talking about, the soul as being described as this actual vapor or this small cloud that can be seen leaving the body at death. There are accounts from medieval and early modern sources of people claiming to have seen the soul depart, always described in terms of this smoke or thin cloud. Now, some traditions held that the soul could be seen as a small flame or light, so like a will-o-wisp, a corpse candle, hovering near the body or traveling away from it after death. Others described it as this a butterfly or bird, something particularly that flies, that moves through air, that is light and substantial. And, the most common description across the widest range of cultures is just a simple vapor. So, death, of course, is a transition from one state to another, and that the medium of that transition is breath. The soul changes state. It goes from being embodied to disembodied. And the moment of transition, that last breath, is the moment when you can actually see this happening. This has, profound implications for how we understand spirit contact and spirit manifestation and the nature of the spirit world itself. If spirits are beings who have transitioned from solid to vaporous state, then the spirit world is a fog world. It's a mist realm. It's understood to be, at least by most or some. But of course, this could get a little bit or even more nuanced when we talk about spirits who have maybe never been embodied once as humans or within, a physical realm. But when spirits begin to manifest, when they become perceptible to the living, they're doing the reverse of what happens at death. They're transitioning from vapor back toward this solidity. And they're condensing, like fog condensing into dew. They're becoming more material, more visible, more present. And the first stage of that condensation, the first sign that a spirit is manifesting, is often described as a thickening of the air, a mist, a fog, or a cold spot where breath, of course, becomes more visible. Now, before we get more to that, I do want to mention, fog is often strongly associated with the dead, with ancestors, with spirits of the departed, with the realm of the dead, pressing close to the realm of the living. This makes sense within our framework. If the dead exists in this sort of vaporous state, now, of course, that you don't have to take that so literally, but if the soul departs as breath and continues to exist as spirit matter, then fog is the substance they're maybe made of. When fog gathers, the dead are present, not metaphorically, but literally, the fog is spirit matter and the dead are spirits. Now, this is not gospel. I'm not saying, the dead is purely made of the actual physical form of fog, but, there's something to, maybe pick your brain about. Because, when it comes to even like graveyard fog in particular, has been treated as carrying the presence of the dead. Walking through a foggy graveyard can be seen and practiced as a form of contact. You're moving through the substance of the dead, you're breathing in their exhalations surrounded by their presence, the actual heat rising from the earth, which they are buried under, rises and creates their little chemical reactions with the colder air, maybe condensing and creating this fog. But for ancestor work, fog can be a powerful ally, collecting fog water from a graveyard, and of course, with appropriate respect and offerings. But it gives you water that carries this ancestral energy, or even deeper if you do further cemetery work. But working with magic in foggy conditions can facilitate ancestor contact nonetheless. Paying attention to the fog when it comes, where it gathers, how it behaves, can really give you information about the dead, particularly, and their movements. Even breathing on offerings for the dead, exhaling over food, drink, or other offerings left for ancestors. Now, of course, one will always be in tune to whether this is appropriate or not for their own belief, but it can be a way of adding your life force into the offering, of making it more accessible to spirits who exist in this sort of vaporous state. Your breath bridges the gap between the material offering and the immaterial recipients. So, in some traditions, breathing into graves or burial sites as a way of communicating with the dead, sending their spirit matter down to where the dead rest, creates a channel of vapor between the living and, of course, the departed. Conversely, there are traditions that warn against, breathing in certain contexts related to death. Don't breathe in the graveyard at night. Don't inhale near a corpse. Don't breathe in the direction of a funeral procession. The logic is that, you might inhale spirit matter that isn't yours, that you might take in the energy of the dead, the residue of departed souls, and really the general miasma of death. Now, this exists in many cultures and traditions, and if you are more interested in that, I would, of course, encourage you to go do your due diligence. But these warnings, while they might seem superstitious, are actually, of course, practical magical hygiene based on the same principles that we've been discussing. If breath is the spirit matter, and if the air around the dead is full of their spirit matter, then breathing in that environment means taking their energy into your body. For most people, and in most circumstances, that is not desirable. You want to be very selective about what spirit matter you inhale. Now, the associations between spirit and the cold is well documented in both folk tradition and, of course, modern paranormal accounts. Rooms get cold with when spirits are present, cold spots from where spirits are standing. The temperature drops when the dead are near. This is not just something Zach Bagans yaps about, but can actually be something that you might experience. The cold might just make spirit matter more perceptible. If a spirit is present, if there's a concentration of spirit matter in a specific location, the temperature in that area might drop because the spirit matter is absorbing heat, or because the presence of the immaterial creates a thermal differential, which is, why we have all that fancy ghost hunting tech. But in that cold spot, your breath becomes visible. You can see your own spirit leaving your body. The cold that the spirit brings makes the invisible visible, both the spirit's presence and your own breath spirit. So this is why cold spots are, significant. There's zones where the conditions for perceiving spirit matter have been created. The cold is often the spirit's gift to your perception, even. It's not making, but it's showing up in a way that is very understandable to us humans in our little human minds, creating the conditions under which you can see what's just normally hidden. Now, of course, I have to mention fog and mist being treated as a portal as well. This sort of doorway between worlds. People who walk into fog and emerge somewhere unexpected. You see this in lots of media and movies and shows, and that's for good reason. There's actually history and some folklore and accounts behind all that. Most notably, the fairy traditions of Britain and Ireland are full of this. Fog rolls in, and suddenly you're in fairy territory. The mist conceals the transition. You don't see the boundary, you don't notice the crossing, but you're just suddenly somewhere else. The fog is this doorway, and you walked through it without even realizing. So the fog plays as this natural portal. A time and condition when crossing between worlds is easier, and when the boundary is thinner. When moment between the realms requires less effort, you could say. Working magic in the fog, meditating in the fog, doing spirit work in the fog, all of these take advantage of the natural portal that fog creates. But it also suggests caution, because if fog is a portal, then being in fog means you're at the threshold. And thresholds are places where things can cross in both directions. You might reach into the spirit world more easily in the fog, but the spirit world can also reach into yours more easily as well. So we've talked about some breath and fog, but I do want to mention maybe some practical stuff when it comes to the logic of fumigation and incense, because this is smoke and vapor and essentially a sort of fog that we could create within our own spaces, in our own ritual spaces, our homes. Incense isn't just about making your space smell nice, and it's not just about, raising the vibration or whatever vague language gets thrown around, but incense is a technology, or at least there's a technology behind it, for creating this sort of spirit matter, for producing visible vapor that spirits can use as a medium for manifestation and, of course, communication. So when you burn incense, you're transforming solid matter into vapor. And I'm just using vapor. I know scientifically it's not vapor, but you're taking something material like your resin, your wood, your herbs, and converting it into smoke. You're creating spirit matter essentially by bringing the spirit of those ingredients, be it the herbs, the resins, the woods, and forcing to extract their spirit matter through this smoke. This is why incense has been used in spiritual practice across. Uh, nearly every culture that has access to aromatic materials. It's a practical technology based on the understanding that, once again, spirits exist in this vaporous state, and that by creating vapor, by filling a space with smoke, you're creating a medium that spirits can inhabit and can use and can work with. So if you think about it very logically, I guess, if spirits are just, let's say, beings of vapor for this particular thing, then a room full of incense smoke is a room full of spirit substance. You've created an environment that's hospitable to spirits. You've filled this space with the same kind of matter that they're made of, or at least they can um, access. You've made it easier for them to be present, to manifest, to communicate, to sort of ride the smoke and the clouds in order to uh, manifest physically. So, of course, you've created this atmosphere that proves to most times be more accessible to spirits. It's also an infrastructure between the material and the immaterial. Now, of course, you don't need to always have incense burning, but it is something to, I think, remember when you light it up intentionally. Now, on the note of suffumigation, the grimoire tradition, the medieval and Renaissance magical texts we've discussed many times on this podcast place enormous emphasis on what they call suffumigation, the use of specific incenses and perfumes in magical operations. Now, the Key of Solomon, Agrippa's three books of occult philosophy, the Magus, all of these texts contain detailed instructions about which incenses to use for which purposes, how to prepare them, how to burn them, and why they matter. Agrippa writes extensively about the virtue and efficacy of perfumes, explaining that different aromatic substances attract different spiritual forces. Certain resins attract planetary spirits, certain woods attract elemental forces, and certain herbs attract specific deities or angels. The smoke is, this lure. It's a medium, a substance that specific spirits are drawn to because it resonates with their nature. And while in general, many spirits seem to be quite hyper aware of scents and smells. But, in the Key of Solomon, this actually instructs the practitioner many times to fumigate the ritual space, the tools, and themselves before performing any operation. So the fumigation is purification and it's this preparation. It's filling the space with spirit matter so that the spirits being invoked have something to work with, something to inhabit, and actually use as their medium for their presence for the magician. Now, with smoke, of course, comes the capnomancy, so the divination by smoke. You burn incense and, of course, other materials and read the behavior of the smoke, its direction, its density, its movement, its patterns as messages from the spirit world. The spirits are using the smoke, the medium you've provided for them, to send messages. So the smoke might move in ways that are easy for you to interpret. Something is shaping it, something is using it to speak. In practical terms, capnomancy can be as simple as watching just how your incense smoke behaves during a working, like taking note if it rises up. That's generally read as a positive sign, clear communication, acceptance of an offering, and this sort of unobstructed flow between you and the spirits. Now, if it swirls or maybe eddies that might indicate turbulence, uncertainty, the presence of multiple forces. Does it move towards you? The spirits maybe are reaching out, coming closer, engaging, and if it's moving away, maybe it's withdrawing or directing your attentions elsewhere. Now, beyond divination, smoke serves as an offering as well. And the rising smoke carries the essence of, whatever you're burning upward toward the spirits, toward the gods, toward whatever powers you're working with. So often, smoke is seen as this sort of vehicle that carries your offering from the material realm to the spiritual realm. Now, this is why incense is burned during offerings. The food offering feeds the body, the smoke offering feeds the spirit, the rising vapor carries the essence of the offering to the beings who exist in this state. Now, smoke, of course, is used for cleansing, whether it is sage, cedar, palo santo, juniper, rosemary, or any other cleansing herb. Um, Again, do your due diligence about where you're sourcing and all that stuff, but it works on the same principle. we've been discussing. The smoke fills the space with the spirit matter that carries the specific qualities of the plant being burned. When cleansing, the smoke doesn't just cover up negative energy, it physically displaces it, it pushes it out, and it replaces it with something else. This is, why thorough smoke cleansing involves getting the smoke into every corner, every crevice, every space where stagnant energy or the spirits might hide, filling the entire volume of the space with new spirit matter, leaving no room for the old. So, when we start to talk about the actual witch's breath itself, not what we can learn about what everyone thought about breath, but using the witch's breath, it is, one of the oldest and most fundamental magical tools that we have. It requires no equipment, no ingredients, no preparation. You already have it, and quite frankly, you've always had it. So, when you speak a prayer, you're releasing breath vapor shaped by words. When you blow on a charm, you're directing breath vapor at an object. When you whisper an incantation, it's creating a focused stream of spirit matter aimed at a specific target. So your breath is the most personal, most intimate, most powerful form of fumigation available to you. It carries your spirit, your life force, and your specific energy. Of course, no incense can do that. Frankincense carries the energy of frankincense. Dragon's blood carries the energy of dragon's blood, but your breath carries the energy of you. This is why breath magic is very potent and actually very, very personal. When you breathe on something, you're giving it a piece of yourself. You're infusing it with your own spirit substance, and you're creating an intimate connection between your life force and the object or person or space that you're breathing towards. This is really an activation. This is the moment when the working goes from just being a collection of materials with an intention to actually being a living material object. You have ensouled it. Now, you've built a working, you've chosen materials that correspond to your intention, right? You've arranged them with purpose, and you've spoken words or held focus. But until you breathe into it, it's really just seen as potential. It's a vessel waiting to be filled. Your breath is what fills it. Your breath is what makes it alive. And you're transferring spirit. You're giving a piece of your life force into the working, and more importantly, you're animating it with your own soul substance. Now, of course, if breath carries spirit, and if the quality of that spirit is shaped by intention, then breath can carry blessing or curse depending on what you put into it. Breathing on someone or something that with love, with healing intention, with the desire to bless, that breath carries those qualities. It deposits them on the target like dew settling on a surface. The blessing is literally breathed into being. And the reverse is also true. Breath directed with malice, with the intention to harm, with anger or hatred, that breath carries those qualities too. This is why cursing traditions across cultures often involve breathing or blowing toward the target. The breath carries the curse, and the breath is the curse, shaped by intention and directed by will. So you may breathe on food to bless or curse it, breathing on water to charge it, breathing on wounds to heal them, or even on objects to enchant them. The breath is the delivery mechanism for whatever magical intention really the practitioner holds. So, when you want to use breath for cleansing, to blow away unwanted energy or to clear space, or really just to simply remove what doesn't belong, you can think about this instinctive act of blowing on something to clean it. If you've ever been there blowing out the back of your iPhone charger or your Nintendo or your PlayStation, blowing dust off a surface, blowing on a wound, or blowing on food that's fallen. Of course, the 5-second rule. There's a magical logic embedded in this instinct. Your breath, carrying your life force, displaces what was there before. It replaces foreign energy with your own, and it clears and claims simultaneously. Some blow on their hands before beginning work, clearing them, charging them, preparing them to be instruments of magic. Of course, I think of gambling, or like, when you blow on the dice. And this correlates to, of course, blowing on other tools or objects to cleanse them or to ensoul them with energy before using them for their purpose. You can, of course, blow to cleanse a space as well. So, like standing at the center of a room and blowing toward each corner, each wall, each threshold with the intention of clearing whatever has accumulated. Your breath pushes out the stagnant, the unwanted, and just the residual and replaces it with this fresh spirit matter carrying your intention for the space. Now, breath can be used to open and activate as well, and it can seal and close. So, breathing on a completed working with the intention to seal it, to close it off, or to lock it down, to make it impervious to outside interference. The logic connects to what we discussed about the Key of Solomon and the Grimoire tradition emphasis on sealing workings after completion. So your breath directed with the intention to seal creates a layer of your own spirit matter over the working. It's like a skin, like a membrane or a seal of wax. Nothing gets in through that seal without passing through your energy first. And you can seal thresholds with this breath, breathing on your door frame, your windowsill, the boundaries of your space with the intention that your breath carries a barrier. Every spoken spell is breath magic. So every incantation, every prayer, every word of power, these are all breath that is shaped by voice, spirit matter molded by language, vapor given, form by intention. When you speak a spell, you're exhaling the spirit matter that has been shaped by the specific vibrations of the words that you're speaking. The words are the mold and the breath is the substance. So together they create something, a shaped piece of spirit matter released into the world to do its work. This is why, I believe the voice matters so much in magic. This is, why you speak a spell, the way you speak it, how loud you speak it, the tone, the rhythm, the emotion behind it. All of these things shape breath, and the breath is the actual magical substance being released. A spell whispered, carries different energy than a spell shouted. And a spell sung even carries different energy than when you just speak it plainly. The words, of course, might be the same, but the breath, the spirit matter, it is shaped differently by different modes of vocalization. And this is why silence has power too, even discussing this in the secrecy episode. When you hold your breath, when you keep your words inside, you're retaining spirit matter. You're not releasing it. You're actually building a pressure, building charge, and building this sort of density. The silence is the sealed vessel, and then that makes this speech its release. So now that I've kind of talked about the more practical uses of how to use breath and even voice in your workings, um, fog, of course, and mist is something that you can actually use very practically. It's not just something that you can go walk through or, even just understanding it as this sort of a portal and this connection to the other world, but it's actually something that is quite tangible. Now, the first thing I am going to recommend is, of course, just thinking about the uh, perfect liminality and this in between state of what fog actually is and how you could correlate and use that within your own practices and your own spells and workings. It's not rain, it's not falling, it's not liquid in the way that we usually think of liquid, and it's not clear air either. You can see through it. It has substance, it has presence, but most importantly, it's something that is suspended. It's in between. It's water that hasn't decided whether to be sky or earth yet, vapor or liquid, visible or invisible. It is completely its own thing. It really has to be one of the most recognizable liminal states, which is why it has been associated with the spirit world across, all these cultures that experience it. So when fog rolls in, the world really changes. Familiar landscapes suddenly become strange and distances collapse. Things that were far away seem close, and things that were close disappear. Sound behaves very differently in fog. Light behaves, of course, very differently in fog. And the ordinary rules of perception simply break down. And you're left in a space that feels neither fully here nor fully elsewhere. And I personally love the fog for this reason. Fog water is, water that has been condensed from fog, collecting mist, gathering from the air itself rather than from a stream or a tap or a rain barrel. And its magical properties are distinct from other types of water because of what fog is and where it comes from. So, to actually collect fog water, it requires much patience and the right conditions, but it's not difficult. You need fog, obviously, and you need a surface for the fog to condense on. That is the most important part. The simplest method is to leave a clean glass or ceramic bowl outside during foggy conditions and just simply let the mist condense on the surface and collect it in the bowl. A wide, shallow bowl works, better than a deep, narrow one because it has more surface area for condensation. But you can also use a piece of clean cloth like cotton or linen stretched over a frame or over your lawn and leave it in the fog. The mist condenses on the fibers and drips into a collection vessel below maybe. Or I find even if like the fibers itself, like the cotton or the linen. If you're using like a t-shirt or something, you could, if you collect enough, you could actually wring it out and put it in your vessel that way. And this is, how some communities in fog-prone areas actually collect drinking water. So it's definitely a proven technology. And cold surfaces collect fog water faster than warm ones because the temperature differential encourages this sort of condensation. So, a metal bowl left outside on a cold, foggy morning will collect water much faster than a ceramic one. And of course, the timing of collection can really make a great difference as well. Fog collected in the dawn, the mist that forms in the early morning and burns off as the sun rises, carries the energy of transitions, of the boundary between night and day, of things emerging from darkness into light. Evening fog is, that mist that rolls in as the sun sets, carrying the energy of concealment and things withdrawing from visibility and of the boundary between day and night. Fog that forms over water, like rivers, lakes, and marshes, carries the energy of those water sources in addition to the liminal quality of the fog itself. And I don't mean just like pick up the water that, the fog has fallen over, but like near it, the brush near it, and all that stuff. But fog, even in graveyards, like carries the energy of the dead we were talking about, and forest can carry the energy of the wild, where you collect matters. Now, uses for fog water can be so many things. So, like scrying and divination, fog water in a dark bowl makes an excellent scrying medium. The water that, came from the veil between worlds is naturally suited to seeing between worlds. Use it for divination, for spirit communication, and for seeing what's hidden. You can also use fog and mist for concealment magic because fog water carries concealment energy. Use it in workings for invisibility, for hiding, for making yourself or your workings unnoticeable. Wash your hands in fog water before doing work you want to keep secret. Sprinkle it at your thresholds to make your home less noticeable to those who would pry, and of course spirit contact too. So fog water can be used to facilitate communication with spirits. You can add it to offerings, use it to anoint objects dedicated to spirit work, sprinkling it in spaces where you want to invite spirit presence. You're offering spirits a substance that's kind of made of their own medium. It's existed in their state, in their realm, and in their substance. So really any liminal working, any magic that involves crossing boundaries, transitioning between states, moving between worlds, of course, invisibility and concealment, and even transformation, for transition, for moving from one phase of life to another. Fog water can also be used for a particular like kind of cleansing. So like not in the harsh banishing kind, but think very soft and obscuring. Washing with fog water doesn't blast away what's there. It actually veils it. It softens it. It starts to blur the lines and make things less defined. That rhymed a little bit. Oh my God, bars. Anyway, this is very useful when you don't want to destroy something, but want to make it maybe just less present, less sharp, and less dominant. Then we have, beauty and glamour magic. So across folk traditions, dew and fog water have been used in beauty magic forever. Washing the face in the morning, dew for beauty and youth is a widespread practice, particularly associated with, of course, Beltane and May Day. Fog water carries similar energy, the energy of soft focus, of mystery, of being seen through a flattering veil rather than in harsh clarity. Now, storing the fog water can be a little tricky sometimes. Fog water should be stored in glass, clear or dark, but depending on your purpose. Clear glass if you want maybe the water to remain connected to light and visibility, and maybe dark glass if you want to preserve its concealment and mystery qualities. And of course, label it and date it, the location and the conditions of the collection. Fog water collected at dawn on a specific date in a specific place is, of course, a unique substance. It carries the energy of that specific moment in that specific location. Knowing what you have helps you use it appropriately. Now, it is really useful to also add a small amount of alcohol if you can, like vodka or grain alcohol, to preserve the fog water and prevent it from going stagnant. However, if you feel that this interferes with the actual qualities of the water, obviously don't do it. But if you are storing it for long preservation, then I would recommend doing it. But some people just prefer to use it fresh or within a few days of collection. Now, sort of working with the land's breath. So, with the land spirits and the genus loci with the spirits of place, fog is an extraordinary opportunity. When the land is breathing visibly, when the spirit matter is hanging in the air around you, you're in direct contact with the land's essence in a way that's not usually available. Walking in fog with awareness, with openness, with the intention to connect with the land's spirit, this is a form of communion. You're breathing in what the land is breathing out. You're taking its spirit into your body, and you're in this very intimate contact with the place in a way that, clear weather doesn't allow. If you want to deepen your relationship with the land you live on, spend time in its fog. I honestly, this might just sound weird or maybe too woo woo, but I love to go out, particularly in the morning with my dog when the mist is really thick. And we get that here. I'm on the coast, so we really have a lot of thick fog in the morning. But um, just letting yourself breathe it in, let it touch your skin when you're actually walking through it. Let it surround you. Pay attention to what you feel, what you sense, what impressions come to you, especially if you're in a very natural place and you do further work when it comes to your land spirits or the plants around you. The land, of course, is speaking through its breath, and the fog is the moment when the speech becomes, something that you can actually touch. So definitely take the opportunity to work with your breath as well. Whenever you create a magical object, a charm, a talisman, a mojo bag, a just candle, a jar working, anything, finish by breathing on it. A conscious, intentional exhalation that carries your life force, your intention, and your spirit into the object. And when fog appears in your environment, treat it as an opportunity. The veil is thin, the spirit world is close, the land is breathing very visibly. So, this could be a time for your spirit communication, your divination, scry, pull cards, read signs, maybe spend some time out in it. Concealment work. Of course, I really love the idea of using fog for concealment work. I just think it adds a little oomph to it. If you need to hide something, make something invisible to conceal your workings. Fog is definitely an ally here that I think many people don't think of. Um, but collect your fog water and even use it as an opportunity to contact ancestors or spirit work. If the fog is thick and the conditions feel right, reach out to your dead. They might seem to be closer within this time, and the medium between you is ultimately thinner. And you can make smoke reading as a regular part of your practice, even if it's just for a little moment before you go on doing your other thing. Every time you burn incense, whether for a specific working or, like I said, just your daily devotion, pay attention to the smoke, watch how it behaves, notice patterns, develop your own vocabulary for what different smoke behaviors mean. Now, over time, this becomes a constant source of feedback from the spirit world. You're never burning incense without receiving information. The smoke is always communicating. You just have to actually learn to read it and develop a practice of breathing blessing onto people and things that you love. When you hug someone, breathe blessing onto them. Let your exhale carry love, protection, and well being. When you prepare food for your family or even your spirits, if you wish, um, breathe over it. Let your breath carry nourishment beyond the physical. When you tend your garden, breathe on your plants. Let your life force support their growth. So now I think I've gone on about breath and fog and all this mystical, pun intended, stuff for long enough. Your breath is not nothing. Your breath is spirit. It's the same substance that throughout all of our human history has identified as the soul, the life force, the animating principle of all living things. Fog is the veil between worlds made visible. It's spirit matter hanging in the air, and it's the land breathing. It's the medium between spirits manifesting and what we actually can perceive from what is normally just hidden to us. Smoke is very much of a communication technology and it's spirit matter created through transformation. So fill your space with the substance that spirits can inhabit and actually use. Every stick of your incense you burn is building a bridge between those worlds. And the connection between all of these, breath, fog, smoke, mist, and vapor, is that they're all the same thing, just at different scales and in different contexts. They're all spirit matter, at least in my humble opinion. They're all, the visible form made perceivable for us and the substance of the in between. So when you see your breath on a cold morning, you're actually seeing your spirit. when you walk through the fog, you're walking through the land's spirit, and however you perceive animism within your own craft. You watch this incense smoke rise, you're watching spirit matter being created and released, and blowing on a charm to activate it. You're breathing your soul into the object. So, with that said, I want to say a deep thank you to all who have listened today, all who support the show and like and rate. I value each and every one of you. And as always, wherever you are in the world, have a wonderful morning, day, or night.